Ronald Gunderson. Dr. Gunderson has been at NAU since 1977, which incidentally is the year I graduated from high school. But in all those years, he's been one of the most dedicated faculty, taking on literally any job he's asked to do, including some that are not all that much fun. So we really appreciate Ron's dedication.
Okay, good morning. Welcome back to our 41st Outlook seminar. And as our dean said, I've been here for almost all of those, for better or worse. One of these days you're going to get real tired of me. Some of you may have already gotten tired of me. But clearly, yes, I'm supposed to speak about regional issues. I will, but as I always do, and particularly this year, I do need to speak a bit about the national issues, partly because they're interesting and partly because they impact what's going on here. So generally, we could disagree on quite a bit, but I think there's a few things that we all agree on, and one is that the campaign for president in the U.S., that needs to be shortened a little bit. We're all tired out. It's been a rough week, a rough year, and I don't want to go through these types of things again. So let's hope they can agree on that. Second, I think that, when you have these populist movements, and clearly Mr. Trump has headed a populist movement, and that's the mood of the country today, it's because people are angry. And, when I looked at it a little bit, yeah, they are angry. Things have gone on this way for quite some time, and they're tired of it. Now, I don't think that's the case. Of course, the Flagstaff politicians, we're much more content here, I think. But nationally, people aren't real happy, are they, with a whole lot of things. So it's not surprising. Now, I wouldn't have predicted President Trump or incoming President Trump to win, but I'm not surprised. I mean, anything can happen these days. The only thing I think that's really surprising is that it's both happened in the same year. That's to me a little bit surprising, but you can't argue that things can't happen. So we'll focus, I think, today primarily on the economic content and the potential economic ramifications of a Trump presidency. We could talk, of course, about a lot of the non-cultural activities, and there's certainly a lot of unease and a lot of concern about that. But when you look at the economics, clearly, yes, things are going to be different. You could say, well, at first blush, when you think about it, that you thought maybe the world was ending, but the sun's going to come up. I mean, the sun's going to come up again. The difficulty or the change is that it's not going to look the same. So if you carefully look at this, things aren't going to be quite the same as they have been in the past. Your sun is going to look a little bit different, and we can only wait and see. The good thing about coming up with predictions on days like today is that I don't really have to know a whole lot because nobody else knows what's going to happen either. It's just going to be different. It's going to be quite different. So then you say, well, how are we doing? Well, I have to think, if you're wanting to know how's the economy been doing, we're going to look back a little bit, things like this. It's like going out bird watching with your son, or your children or something, and the child spots the bird in the tree and says, look, Dad, there's a falcon in the tree, there's a falcon in the tree, and you look out and you say, yeah, I guess you're right, there is a falcon. There is a falcon. It's there. I thought they were extinct, but they're there. So with that, there's no more comments. There's no more good news. How are we doing? Sorry. I was born quite a bit before Dr. Van Slyke, about the time actually where this chart starts. And at that time, right after the post-World War II period, you can look at the annual change in the GDP, the gross domestic product, and if you look at the almost 70 years that have gone on since that time, we've got some ups and downs. But if you look carefully at that chart, you can see that for the first half, up until about 1982, the ups were pretty high, and the lows, of course, came about. But since 1982, there has been a change. That is, there have been no changes, I should say, no cyclical trends, looking at the annual percentage change in the GDP, where we have risen about 5%, whereas that occurred 6 or 7 times in the first half. So some changes have gone on in the economy since that time, and that could be due to a number of global changes and situations, of course. But what has gone on at that time also is that we have been doing things a bit differently in the country. That is, in 1982, which was when President Reagan was in office, we cut taxes. He was a supply sider and was expecting that you would have an increase in revenue when you cut taxes. And from a supply side perspective, that's correct if you're on the right side of the curve. But we weren't. And what happens is you end up continuing to spend and not taxing, and you end up with a higher and higher debt. And the higher debt has been continued for that period of time, so that now it's so high that expansionary fiscal policy really isn't something that can be used in the same way that it might have been, say, several years ago, because of the potential ramifications that come about with too high a debt. So if you don't have fiscal policy, well, how about monetary policy? And of course, we've also tried that. We've had the quantitative easing and the other policies of the last several years. And this has largely been accomplished by the Federal Reserve buying U.S. Treasuries. And when they do that, of course, the increase in the demand for the Treasuries keeps interest rates low. You try to have a low interest rate environment to spur investment, and the investment then can pull the economy forward. Well, that hasn't really worked the same way that we have expected either. That is, the change here in the GDP, as I said, has not been what we'd like, and I think that has probably been the source of a lot of discontent, although a lot of people maybe not recognize it. That is, when I say people are angry and people are frustrated, largely it's because a lot of folks, if you get used to a high growth environment and the pie is increasing, you can all benefit at the same time. But when the pie doesn't increase, or when it's stagnant in size, and you have increases in the economy somewhere, somebody's going to get squeezed, and that's probably where a lot of the discontent comes about. And that's maybe human nature. It's not necessarily something that's unique to us or unique to our period. So what's gone on then is you have this potential for growth with low interest rates on the monetary side, but if you look at the gross domestic investment, and this is, of course, business spending for machines, buildings, and equipment, and upgrading, and so forth, that particular increase and decrease is expected because of optimism and pessimism. Gross investment in the economy is largely a function of expected future profits, and that is obviously going to go up and down based on a number of factors. But again, if you look carefully at the chart, and I think you can see the little gray lines in the background there, those are recessionary periods. And every time that real gross domestic investment falls too far below that 0%, it has always been followed by a recession during this period of time. It can dip a little bit, like it did, maybe in the part of the 60s, and there was another little dip right about 1988, where it did go below 0. That is, where there was negative gross investment for the year. But in all those other periods, those 7 recessions have always been accompanied by a reduction, a negative real gross domestic product, and look where we are today. We are below that line. And if we get very much further below that line, a recession is going to happen. And you cannot blame the political parties for that. When they don't happen, they take the credit. When they do happen, they give the other party the problem. But that's not the way it works. I don't believe that politics is behind that. It's simple economics. And the other thing that occurs, that has occurred, that I'm really depressed about, and it's not hard to get me depressed, as many of you know. We've had a decline in productivity ever since I was born. They go up and down, and I had nothing to do with that, by the way. They go up and down this is the 16-month moving average. But, you know, ever since the late 1940s, that trend has been downward. And that is where you get increases in wages, and that is where you get optimism, and that is where the economy begins to pick up, and you start to share in the benefits. Now, the last quarter, the numbers that just came out a few days ago, the number popped up again. That is, the third quarter productivity was pretty good, but that may just be a blip. So we'll wait and see. But in general, without that increase, we're in for some hard times, and I'm sure that when we get to the panel, we'll be discussing things like that, or part of that. Okay, well, I do need to spend a little time on the regional economy, the local economy here. And of course, one of the things that you know, you've heard me say for today and many other days is that we have some problems at the national level, and yet locally many times we look better than the nation, and that's not surprising. I mean, you can have these periods of growth and pockets of growth in various areas because of your unique position. That is, your own resources or where people are interested in moving, and the local economies. And as a result, you do get these pockets of growth, and I think we're very fortunate in Flagstaff to be in one of those positions. And if you look around the city today, you can see a very big increase in construction activity. That is partly maybe pent-up demand because of activity that did not occur after the last recession. But now, you know, if you look downtown, if you look at the Village at the Mall, you look at the tracks over on East 66 or Country Club Drive, Mill and Mesa, other parts in town, and of course on the campus, you're seeing a large amount of construction. You get a huge increase in that activity, and it generates a lot of jobs. And if you want to be optimistic about something, you can look at the local economy here, and you can see the increase in the number of jobs, many of them high-paying jobs, more diversity in the types of jobs that might be available for future graduates. The growth in high-tech and medical sectors has been encouraging. There has been a slow but steady increase in tourism, and of course a considerable increase in activity at NAU, partly in the form of increased enrollment. So those particular signs then are all pointing upward right now. And you have to be optimistic about that, although we still have our concerns, right? That is the highway congestion, which I know most of you have to navigate each day, is not going to go away right away, I think. And I believe the local paper and the candidates running for office have done a good job of publicizing this over the last several weeks. In terms of recognizing that this is something that is a part of growth, and we're going to have to address it. And I don't have a particular way to suggest how we proceed, other than I think it's critical that we do proceed, because otherwise you're trying to fit a growing child in last year's clothes, and we do need to do something to very major change in how we're going to navigate the city. Obviously, we have the high cost of living here, which largely manifests itself in the form of higher housing prices and higher rental costs. Those kinds of sort of day-to-day experiences are things that we recognize. There's good things and there's bad things about it. I mean, it's nice to live in a community where you have that kind of pride in your activity and willing to pay for it, but of course it's difficult if you're trying to meet day-to-day expenses. So it's good and bad, but we recognize that's the case. And then maybe we'll talk on the panel a little bit about minimum wage legislation, because that was part of not only local but state and other state policies as well over the last couple weeks here. From an economic perspective, there are some negatives with that. I think that clearly it does distort the hiring process. A lot of studies have been done as to how many jobs might be lost when you have to pay higher wages. My concern is not so much that, but it's also that some businesses and some nonprofits may have to disappear completely, and then the service is gone for everybody, including those who may really need it. That's a potential downside of the minimum wage. And the other one is, of course, that costs labor costs increase, that increases the cost of producing anything, and it will increase the prices eventually, and then everybody has to pay that price. So there's pros and cons. I think many economists will agree that there are better ways to handle this. The minimum wage legislation it looks good on the surface, but it's not all that comprehensive. It only applies to workers who have a job. There's many people who are very poor who don't have a job. They're not even covered by this. So there's a lot that could be said to that, but I don't have the time in this presentation. But a couple more things before we finish. If I look at the annual single-family homes, which is one of our indicators in Flagstaff, this is, of course, very encouraging that the numbers here are from the elite team at Remax Peak Properties. They always give me these numbers, and I have to note that this is for the Flagstaff market. It's not just for the city of Flagstaff, but all our unincorporated suburbs as well. And in these numbers, you can see that in 2009, when we were in the recession, we had about 650 homes that were sold, and then by last year it was over 900, and this year we're likely to be over 900 as well. For the first 9 months we were almost 700, and if we have another 150 or so before, or 150 to 200 before the end of the year. So then we'll be about even with last year, which is quite a bit above where we were. And the other part here is the median home price. If you look at the home price of single-family homes, it had been close to $400,000 in 06, 07. It dropped quite a bit by 2012. We were down well under $300,000, and now we're back up to about $380,000. So those median home sales prices are high, and as I say, that also has good and bad points. But obviously, what it does is it stimulates the thinking among many home sellers, potential sellers of the home in the market. It gives buyers a wider choice and perhaps mitigates future increases. So there's some good things about that. And then my final slide for this portion is the Flagstaff business activity, the taxable sales, and this is largely kind of our proxy for local GDP in some sense. And we were up 7.5% in the year ended fiscal 16 ending this summer. That's not double digits. We have been double digits some years, but it's largely it's been pretty good. Led by auto sales, about 18%, the tourism sector around 7%, and then the other retail, both large and small retail, around 9%. So with that, I'll stop and let Dennis come up, and then we'll pick up some of these things again at the panel. Thank you very much.